Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, a final flight or just flights of fancy. The US space program's going into reverse with the space shuttle's last launch. But why has it cost the Earth to get astronauts into space? Also, united we stand. International airlines say no to Euro plans for a carbon emissions tax. We ask the environmentalists if it's the way forward anyway.
Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing.
And cold hard cash in the form of cold hard technology. Can an online currency called Bitcoins eventually replace the mighty dollar? So, what would Captain Kirk think? Yes, he and the TV program Star Trek are fictional and the US space shuttle is no Starship Enterprise. But it is a symbol of America's vision to boldly go where no man has gone before. And that vision is over. For now, at least. 4, 3. 30 years after the first space shuttle, Columbia, blasted off, the world's first reusable fleet of spacecraft is headed for museums across the United States. Atlantis will make the last of the 135 flights. Now, American spacemen and women will have to rely on the Russians to hitch a ride. So why is NASA being forced to come back down to Earth with such a bump? Well, one reason is the cost, which has, forgive the pun, been astronomical. Once sold to Congress with promises of weekly flights for just $7 million each, the shuttle program has ended up costing more than $1 billion a flight. The total program cost is not far shy of $200 billion. And there's also been a painful human cost. 2 shuttles destroyed, one on takeoff, the other on re-entry, with the loss of 14 astronauts. Both incidents shocked the nation and devastated NASA, which spent billions more keeping the fleet flying. But the most complex machine ever built has also helped deliver some astonishing results. Without it, the Hubble Space Telescope wouldn't have become a reality, not to mention all the upkeep from astronaut repair crews. They enable us to see further than ever before, always with that tantalizing prospect of maybe finding some other inhabitable place or life. The shuttle's main job, though, has been to build and supply the International Space Station, the ever-expanding orbiting laboratory that became home for spacemen and women from around the world. It uses the scientific expertise of 16 nations, including Russia, Japan and Brazil, to conduct thousands of space science experiments. Among its critics, though, is a former NASA astronaut. Dr. Story Musgrave, with 6 missions to his name, spoke to us here on Counting the Cost. He called the International Space Station a $100 billion mistake. In fact, he says the money should not have been spent on a station just 300 or 400 kilometres from Earth, but on hundreds of satellites to explore the entire solar system.
The cost of Space Station, which is a jobs program, the cost of that is we could have had 400 Voyager-class satellites covering the entire solar system. Today, you could flip the channels and 100 different satellites would be communicating the entire solar system to you. So we could have put 400 Voyager-class satellites out there. We'd have had dozens of landers on every planet and every moon of every planet. That's what we gave up. So space is now, as opposed to the 60s and opposed to some of the heroic things that we accomplished, now there is no plan. We don't know what the plan is, so how's the public to know what the plan is? So it's a losing game now, and the public knows that.
Story Musgrave there, an internal critic of the money spent in space. So we've got lots to talk about, not just the end of the shuttle program, but the cost of space exploration and what countries outside of the US are up to as well. And we're going to do all of that with David Parker. He's the Director of Science, Technology and Exploration at the UK Space Agency, joining us from Bristol. David, thank you for your time. Bottom line here, with the shuttle finishing up its 30-year run, do you believe it had to stop? Was money the issue, or had this just run its course?
Well, it's reached the end of its natural life, and what the NASA is doing now is developing its new generation of spaceships so they can go beyond the Earth again, start to explore the solar system. And the main role of the space shuttle has been building the space station, and that job is done, so it's time to move on.
You don't think it was almost expedited, though, much in the way that, say, Concorde was? You know, there was an accident, people discovered getting it back off the ground was actually going to be very costly. And the timing, there's a global recession. Well, maybe it's not the time to spend money on going to space.
Well, it's a bit of a media myth that NASA's budget is somehow being cut. They're still getting $17 billion a year to do what they're doing, and there's a 6-man crew now on the space station, not just NASA people, but people from Europe, Japan and Russia. And they're carrying on doing what they're doing, but the space shuttle, well, it's a 30-year-old vehicle, and it's time to replace it with something that's more relevant to what they're doing today, which is their real plans is to explore out into the solar system, go back to the moon, to asteroids, and eventually one day send humans to Mars. So that's NASA's vision.
Okay, but to a space skeptic, how would you describe or even justify what we've gotten from space? I'm not just talking about the shuttle, exploration in general. You just described a number of things, exploring our solar system, the moon, Mars. What about someone who thinks, hey, that's a lot of money to just go out exploring space? How do you explain what we've really gotten back?
Well, of course, a greater understanding of the universe and where we've come from, but more than that, space is sort of woven into our everyday lives. For goodness sake, satellite TV is a pretty fundamental industry to communications on a global scale, and we rely on space navigation. We use our GPS systems to get around. And understanding climate change, an awful lot of what we know about the changing planet is thanks to having satellites that are looking down at us. And understanding just simple things like what the weather's going to be tomorrow. So what has space done for us? A heck of a lot. It's very much part of our everyday lives now, and it's going to only get more important as we move forward in this century. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Yeah, you've just made me think I probably wouldn't have a job if it weren't for those satellites up there beaming television all over the world. So yes, we should be very thankful for space. David, I've got a quote here from Scott Altman, who flew 4 space shuttle missions himself, and he said, "I think in the future the big things we do in space are going to take cooperation of the whole world." He's referring to things, I guess, like the International Space Station, which is something tangible up there, which the space program has given us. Again, what is it doing up there? Has constructing the ISS been worth all the cost?
Well, it's been a huge project. It's probably something like $100 billion, maybe more, over 10 or 15 years. But it is one of those projects that's brought the world together. You have Russia cooperating with the former Soviet Union, cooperating with the United States. The Japanese, the Canadians, the Europeans are all involved. So it's a global cooperation project in doing something that's really impressive and peaceful. But now that it's been built, it's going to start doing the science. They're going to start doing medical science, fundamental physics, understanding climate change, and it's even got an instrument aboard that's going to tell us something about the dark matter of the whole universe. So it's a giant scientific laboratory that's going to start working and delivering science for more than 10 years into the future. So I'm looking forward to seeing the kind of results it's going to come up with, but it is early days yet for the benefits that are going to come from the space station. But that global cooperation is very much the future of space. I'd really agree with that. If we're ever going to send humans to Mars, it is going to be a global project, and I can't tell you which nation is going to do it. It's something for the future.
You mentioned a whole lot of other space programs there, and I'm sure we can throw your UK space agency into the ring too. To what degree
Absolutely.
are those other countries outside of NASA in the US expanding their programs? What are they doing out there?
Well, again, there's a great deal going on. Here in Europe, the European Space Agency has a very major program. It's involved in the space station, yes, but we also have a new European global navigation program called Galileo. So that's launching its first satellites later this year. That will provide very high performance navigation and even the sort of safety of life uses. So where you maybe navigating aircraft or navigating ships and you want to rely on it to the very highest degree. So that's a big contribution from Europe. And we are involved in exploring the universe. Europe has spacecraft around Mars and Venus, or even on its way to rendezvous with a comet and explore a comet as it comes through the solar system. And Russia is a program, and then of course China and India are the big newcomers. They're really important in the space sector now. They both have very exciting programs.
So the overall feeling I'm getting from you, David, as we think about Atlantis taking off and landing for the last time, is that this hasn't been about putting 7 people into space at a time, or sending a spaceship up there, or constructing a space station. This has all got far wider consequences, and maybe the money, even at $1 billion per launch, might have just been worth it.
I think the space program is really important to all of mankind's future, and it is a really important industry. It employs a lot of people around the world. Just in the UK, it's worth something like over $10 billion and employs 20,000 people, and that's just in one country. So it's really important for our future, and it's really important for the economy as a whole. It's a growth industry.
David Parker there from the UK Space Agency. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
And there is just one final cost we want to count from the end of the Space Shuttle program, another human cost. Of course, we remember the 14 people who lost their lives in the Columbia and Challenger accidents, but there are now 7,000 men and women who will lose their jobs at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, from where the shuttle would lift off. Florida's already a state struggling with economic hardships. Now places like Titusville, sometimes known as Space City, USA, will need to look for new employment streams, as well as combat the downturn in tourist numbers. And still ahead this week on Counting the Cost, counting the cash, which doesn't exist. We're in New York, where restaurants are now accepting bitcoins instead of credit cards. What's a bitcoin? We'll find out later. Right now, though, we're coming out of orbit down to where the world's passenger jets fly. Much has been made about Boeing's new plane, the 787 Dreamliner, which is the first big jet to be made from composite plastics and not aluminium. That should mean a 20% cut in fuel bills, which is of course welcome news for airlines spending 40% of their revenue on aviation gas. But producing the Dreamliner has been a nightmare so far for Boeing. 3 years late and billions over budget. Even so, it finally made it to Japan. Harry Fawcett was watching that late arrival for us.
They've had plenty of time to get the music just right. Boeing's 787 Dreamliner was introduced with a fitting fanfare for what the company's calling a revolutionary aeroplane. It's also something of a homecoming. 35% of its components were made in Japan. This is a test model, here for a week of flying the domestic routes of Japan's All Nippon Airways, a chance to evaluate its performance and train ground staff. Boeing says the first 787 to enter commercial operation will be delivered to the airline in August or September, more than 3 years late.
No matter how difficult the situation you might face, if you wait patiently, the weather will turn. I can say today, the Dreamliner was worth the wait.
Its outward appearance is impressively sleek, but not a huge departure from current passenger jets. The key difference is what the plane is made of. 50% lightweight carbon fibre composites, more than 4 times the amount used in Boeing's last plane, the 777. That, says Boeing, will help make the Dreamliner 20% more fuel efficient than comparable mid-sized jets, allowing it to fly much further non-stop. Boeing says when the finished interiors are completed, passengers too will notice a difference. Bigger windows, more light, and the whole cabin pressurized to a much lower and more relaxing altitude. The trouble is, Boeing's customers are anything but relaxed. The very advantages of the plane mean that not having it is costing airlines money. So far, Boeing has 835 Dreamliners on order. It's keen now to ramp up production as soon as possible, aware that its European rival, Airbus, is preparing to deliver its own carbon fibre-based plane, the A350, in 2013.
One of the things that we want to make sure we do is deliver a good airplane. And, sometimes that takes longer than we would like. But I believe that once our customers get this airplane and they see how efficient it is, how capable it is, I'm hopeful they'll let us off the hook for being late.
ANA hasn't exactly let its partner off the hook. Boeing is having to pay an undisclosed amount in compensation for the delay, a cost that's likely to be repeated as it delivers what it's calling a game-changing plane to other impatient airlines.
But game changer or not, airlines have got plenty of other issues on their plate right now. While the 787 will cut fuel bills, carriers are about to be landed with a big bill for the pollution their aircraft engines produce. And paying to protect the environment will drive up airfares for you and me. Here's our case study. From January, the European Union plans to expand its carbon emissions trading system. Up until now, only major polluters like power stations were in the scheme, but now the regulators want airlines to pay too. They basically want them to pay for carbon offset permits for all flights in and out of the EU. The US airlines, though, and some from other countries, we must say, have gone to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg trying to stop it. The Air Transport Association of America says the EU ETS provisions would regulate an entire flight from across the United States to the EU, even though the flight would be in EU airspace for only a tiny fraction of the time. So you can understand what the airlines don't like. They're saying the EU is trying to extend its taxing reach beyond its own borders. Let's hear briefly from travel industry writer Simon Calder, who explains how expensive the tax will be for airlines and how the money paid won't necessarily be spent on helping the environment.
The emissions trading scheme will probably involve airlines paying hundreds of millions of dollars to European governments in return for permission to fly to and from the EU. Now, that money is not necessarily going to be ring-fenced, in other words, put to good use in trying to improve the environment in other ways. What the Americans, the Asians and many other governments are saying is, well look, basically this is just a form of taxation to shore up your shaky finances.
So the airlines have gone to court. The judgment is not expected for several months. But environmentalists say now is the time to kick up global efforts at combating the effects of air travel. Keith Allett's with us now from London. He is head of climate change at the environmental group WWF UK. Keith, when we talk about this idea of carbon offsetting, and this is separate really from the argument about the EU policing the skies, do you believe they are truly effective or just a first step?
We think this is an important first step. It's important to look at the history of this. Since the Kyoto Protocol was agreed in 1997, the international aviation and maritime bodies have been charged with coming up with concrete proposals to bring international shipping and aviation into a global agreement. Remember, the emissions from aviation are doubling every decade, and they are becoming an increasingly important part of the problem. So unfortunately, those international talks under the International Aviation Organization have moved with glacial slowness. So although we would love to see a strong and effective global agreement to deal with these sectors, the reality is that this is a very important first step from the EU to build a building block, a stepping stone on the way there. It's actually, we think, given the scale of the challenge, a fairly modest measure, but it's nevertheless one that should be supported and built upon.
Without being too negative on the subject, though, are we not just chasing our tails a bit on this one? I think you alluded to this, the global travel, which is only going to increase as time goes on. And yes, you can try to offset the effects in this way, but the more people that fly means a huge number of planes in the air and probably just the same amount, if not more pollution.
We think that clearly as the world develops, and it's inevitable that flying will increase, but the key question is how much will it increase? What will that growth reflect the carbon costs, the damage costs of the growth? Will there be maximum incentive to improve airline efficiency and also to switch to less polluting modes where there are alternative routes, ways of travel such as high-speed rail? So we think that the first step is to begin to bring the sectors under control. There's one very important dimension to the debate which often gets ignored as well. There's an emissions problem, but there's also an opportunity here, which is actually to begin to generate money, revenues from the emissions trading scheme, and to ring fence them and use them to help developing countries cope with the impacts of climate change, which is another one of the huge challenges we're facing. And it's clear that aviation, international aviation and shipping, done in the right way, could become a significant source of money to help the developing countries adapt to climate change and also to develop in a low carbon way. Okay,
you used a very important word in that answer. You said ring fenced, i.e. The money actually going towards what it's supposed to. Again, are you confident about that happening? If the EU puts in these laws to tax airlines flying in and out of its airspace, are you confident the money will actually go towards the environment and helping offset the damage?
We have to wait and see what the EU does. The ETS directive does strongly encourage member states to do this, but it doesn't require that they should use the money for climate protection purposes. That's one area where we think the EU really needs to get its own house in order and to join up its support for provision of climate finance to developing countries with this golden opportunity to use a source of money to help that purpose.
What about on the technology side of things? We've seen Boeing's Dreamliner, hopefully on its way soon. It'll be more fuel friendly and ostensibly a less polluting aircraft. Do you think that the aircraft manufacturers are concentrating enough on that? Again, they're all about putting more planes in the sky. Are they putting enough into environmentally friendly planes, if there is such a thing, to be fair?
Our take on this is that there's a lot of good work going on to improve the efficiency of new aircraft. That needs to be accelerated. But the problem is that actually, if we're following business as usual growth in the sector, then we are indeed chasing our tails, and any efficiency gains will be swamped by the general growth in the sector. So I think we need to be looking at ways of of maximising the efficiency with which we use air travel. One of the things that we've been working on very strongly here in the UK as WWF is really promoting alternatives to flying, particularly for business travel. And there's a really strong interest in the business community in saving money, improving efficiency, saving time, by actually really using state-of-the-art video conferencing facilities, for instance, which is becoming a really important alternative to flying. And businesses are seeing the opportunity for that. So I think we shouldn't just assume that business as usual trends will continue. We need to find smarter ways of travel.
Keith, just a final thought from you on the corporate side of things, if I can put it that way. We tend to view the big companies, the Boeings, the Airbuses in this case, as sort of corporate behemoths. Do you talk to them? Do you get involved with them on environmental issues and try to strike up some sort of dialogue or cooperation on the environment?
We see business as a key part of the solution. Clearly some business practices are also part of the problem, but we think that we cannot solve the challenges of a sustainable energy future, a sustainable travel future without engaging business. Great talking to you, Keith Allett there from WWF UK. Thank you. Thank you. And, you know, seeing as Keith talked about video conferencing there, we were going to do this later, but we'll tell you now, a big development in that technology. A few weeks back when we talked about Microsoft buying up the internet calling service Skype, now Skype has jumped into the world of Facebook. You'll be able to click the new call button on your friend's profile, and within seconds you'll be having a video chat or even a group chat if you want to talk to a few friends at once. Here's the thing though, Skype on a good day can have upwards of 25 million users online a day. Facebook has around 375 million logging on, half of its estimated 750 million active users. In short, it is opening up some serious numbers to an already prolific service. Finally, we talk about currency a lot on this program, particularly the faltering euro. But how about a new cryptocurrency where your digital wallet is filled with things called bitcoins? Is this experimental currency a crazy idea or the next big thing to replace hard cash with virtual money? Scott Heidler's been seeing how it all works in New York City.
The internet has rung the death knell for companies and organizations who could not keep up, especially the paper-based ones. Is that cash in your wallet next?
Bitcoin is changing finance the same way the web changed publishing.
Enter Bitcoin, an online peer-to-peer currency. Out of reach by any government or central bank, its value is determined by public confidence. The Bitcoin has seen a steady increase in value from birth, but since April, it's been a wild ride. It went from $1 to 30, then in June it fell back to $10, then rose again to 20. Through online exchanges, people use real-world currency to buy Bitcoins once they've set up an account. Then those Bitcoins are credited to an electronic encrypted wallet. But even as the Bitcoin is gaining traction, there's some skepticism over the cryptocurrency.
I can't think of a really good legitimate reason that anybody would be doing Bitcoin to buy milk and eggs and things like that. It's a crazy, wacky currency.
Bitcoin has taken a few hits lately. A compromised user account on one of the exchange sites caused a temporary crash in value. And many see the sole use of the currency an untraceable way to buy illegal drugs on the internet. But to Bruce Wagner, who hosts a web broadcast Bitcoin show, the currency's time is coming.
As soon as we have the point of sale systems of the brick and mortar shops, and I think that's when it's going to happen. There's going to reach a tipping point where, boom, everybody was on Facebook.
We just take that dollar amount, convert it to Bitcoins.
Marwan Salem owns a grill in Manhattan, catering to a young professional crowd. He's started to accept Bitcoin, something his customers found interesting.
Right now, it's so new, we really don't know what to expect from it. It's a very experimental thing for us.
Beyond it being experimental, he's also looking at the possibility of saving on credit card fees.
If people eventually adapt this way of transacting business, it could definitely lower the fees that we pay for credit cards.
While it's unclear how and when the Bitcoin will fully go mainstream, the supporter base is growing beyond the early adopter tech elite.
And that is about our lot for this week, but there's always Counting the Cost online. If there's something in this show or any previous show you'd like to catch up on again, then you head to the main page at aljazeera.net/English. You hit the business tab at the top and it links through to there, the Counting the Cost page. And then when you want to get in touch, at Kamal AJE is where you'll find me on Twitter. You can drop me a line or ask a question and always keep up to date with what is coming up on the show. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.